I never wanted to be making this upcoming installment of this series. When I originally launched Really That Good back in March 2015 with an episode on the original Ghostbusters, one of my main motivations for doing so was that I was fed up with so much of the YouTube cinematic video essay scene being dominated by reflexive negativity. Now, I understand why that was. Angry gets attention, angry gets clicks, angry pays the bills, and also a lot of early success stories in the format generally came from an angry place tone-wise. Your angry video game nerds, your nostalgia critics, your zero punctuations, everybody going apeshit for that Mr. Plinkett Star Wars thing. Hell, CinemaSins is still extremely popular for reasons I completely don't understand. I'm not knocking any of those shows or their creators here, except CinemaSins, which honestly is a blight on movie discourse as a show. I don't know anything about the guys who make it, I assume they're fine, but otherwise they're all super talented. I've enjoyed a lot of what they do, and more broadly, I 100% get that getting angry and even more so unleashing that anger can be cathartic, fun, and legitimately entertaining for others. I mean, I'd be a gigantic hypocrite if I didn't. I know for a fact that a lot of you out there are watching my content because you first found it through a really anger-driven review of the movie Pixels that went viral a few years ago. Now, that review was a lot of fun to write, clearly entertained a lot of people, and I continue to enjoy the tangential, economic, and immediate professional windfall that it's brought to me, so I understand the temptation to just seek out bad movies, try as hard as I can to hate them, and keep trying to make exactly that happen all over again. Lord knows I could stand to see a few more of these videos get up over 1 million views, but the thing about that Pixels review was that it was totally organic. I came out of that piece of shit spitting mad, wrote down what I felt about it in a torrent just to purge it from my system, and then rewrote said torrent into an essay format to see if there was something worth working with there. Turns out there was. How about that? But I determined for myself that chasing that high instead of finding it organically could only lead to the same diminishing returns that from my perspective had come to dominate a lot of film criticism in the video essay format otherwise, not necessarily from the actually talented folks I mentioned a moment ago, but rather spread out across the breadth of the medium. Flaming hot takedowns, eviscerations, and hot takes got attention. Bias-confirming hagiographic positives might net you clicks from devoted fans of this or that property who want their arguments made for them. Measured responses go largely ignored, which is a shame. And it all contributes to the modern, digitally supercharged version of the false and limiting paradigm that has dogged the medium of art, literature, music, and film criticism for as long as there's been such things. The notion that seeking out negatives is the true default setting of critique, that negative reactions are the only response worthy of exploration, and positive response is self-evident, demanding neither justification nor exploration. In other words, the attitude that's responsible for so many people hating film critics because they've bought into this paradigm where the role of the critic is to be negative because if the movie is good, what is there to criticize? And also the reason so many film critics become so easily hateable themselves, because they too have internalized a view of their role as one of destruction rather than deconstruction and demonstration. Now, to my sensibilities, the key to counterbalancing that was very simple. Do a deep dive video essay series that focused exclusively on good movies and mainly highlighting their positives. Not necessarily films from the canon of important film curriculum must-sees, though. Instead, my angle was to put the focus on films that were widely seen, generally held to be good or even great, and so entrenched in the pop psyche as being everybody knows good movies that we don't really talk about them enough. From there, I eventually arrived at a basic mission statement. By the same token that the foundations of modern science were to look at the phenomena that were self-evident, water is wet, fire hot, what goes up must come down, and ask why Really That Good would work backwards from the conclusion stated in the title. We already know these movies worked, but how did they get there? From the beginning, I was sure of exactly two things. Firstly, that if I did this series right and didn't screw it up, which I want to do sometimes, it would be popular. Partly because I've been doing this for a while and have a certain amount of faith in my own abilities, but partly also because the only thing the internet loves more than a brutal takedown essay is an essay that tells them that they're right about an opinion they already hold, which meant that to do the series justice, I'd have to studiously avoid that kind of easy pandering by focusing at least at first on films where the road to answering the why is this good question meant exploring other topics like theme, message, or cultural context. Digging into Ghostbusters leads to a discussion of science versus spirituality presented in media. To investigate Die Hard and National Lampoon's Vacation is to interrogate generational ideals of Western masculinity and American fatherhood. The Avengers and Independence Day both offer a window on the continuing emergence of a global popular culture rooted in quasi-colonialist spread of American pop mythology that is nonetheless increasingly post-national. To look back on the phenomenon of Titanic reveals the depths and reach of the way societal perceptions of gender color what works of art are considered worthy or unworthy of serious discussion. Richard Donner's Superman is a masterclass in and of itself at what does, doesn't, and can't change about cultural mythology from generation to generation. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 are likewise, I maintain, the preserved abstract snapshots of the American psyche immediately post 9/11. The Matrix was effectively the prime genre film herald of the cyberspace and gender identity transcending revolutions that soon came to shape 21st century cultural discourse in ways no one would have predicted. To understand the appeal of A Christmas Story is to confront and recognize the central role of nostalgia in shaping historical narrative. Most recently, unraveling the enduring appeal of Transformers the movie as a generational cult classic offered an opportunity to explore the role of capitalist patronage in the arts and the question of how much it should figure in art criticism. Now, hopefully I've done a decent job with all of those subjects. Not my place to judge, you tell me. But in any case, the second thing I was absolutely sure of was that people would start asking, will you ever do Really That Bad? Pretty much right away. And not just because negativity has become the bread and butter of the YouTube-based video essay about movies medium for the better part of a decade. It's only natural and to be completely expected for inquisitive people to ask whether or not a discussion tool, for lack of a better word, might be applied to some other function. If I find out the new brand of cleaning solution works really good on my windows, my next question is whether or not I can also also use it for spiffing up my countertops and plumbing fixtures. I get it. But for the longest time, I was seriously dead set against doing it anyway, mainly because the whole point of creating Really That Good was to set up a counterweight to the sheer volume of negative essay series. But also, in practical terms, I didn't see a lot of value in it vis-a-vis my ability to contribute meaningfully to the discourse, and I also didn't see a lot of joy in it, and frankly, that one does make a difference. Without getting into the nitty-gritty, the reason I keep pointing you guys to the MovieBob Patreon is I don't make nearly enough money off these videos for it to be worth my while spending time and effort slogging through a project I'm not at least 90% enthusiastic about, and the thought of suffering through multiple viewings and then even more piece-by-piece editing sessions of a movie I despise in order to maybe end up producing the 85th most popular video about Battlefield Earth or Troll 2 or The Room or Birdemic or the Michael Bay Transformers movies or Sharknado or whatever tiresome misfire was the point-and-laugh flavor of the week, it just feels like the most soul-crushing prospect. I respect people who can pull it off. If you're not watching Lindsay Ellis' Whole Plate series about the Michael Bay Transformers filmography, you should be watching that. It's pretty incredible. But the more people asked, and to be completely transparent, the more I saw straw-grasping nitpickathons with no real insight, understanding, or affection for the medium getting passed off as deep analysis of supposedly bad films, the more I started to reconsider. It also helped that I ended up putting a whole section about the two bad Matrix sequels into the original films episode and came away thinking, you know, maybe this would be a good idea. What I did remain steadfast on is that to even consider a Really That Bad, it would have to be undertaken as a one-off, not a new sister series, not something I'd do once every so many normal episodes, a one-time, if at all, digression from the norm that could only be necessitated by the hypothetical scenario wherein I came upon a subject that was truly a terrible film, a top-to-bottom artistic failure that was so profoundly a disaster of a thing that I simply could not stop thinking about it and coming up with new things to say about all the ways in which it went wrong. Not a what planet is this guy from curiosity like The Room or a cynical, rage-seeking missile like Pixels. It'd have to be a bad movie where the volume and complexity of its artistic failings were at least comparable to the artistic successes of the type of films already centered for Really That Good, and none of the usual suspects would fit that bill. I mean, I suppose there's a possibility of opening up Battlefield Earth and finding space to discuss the film as proselytizing tool in general and Scientology's presence in the film industry specifically, but honestly, folks, there's just not as much Scientology in Battlefield Earth as you want there to be, nor is there much of anything else. It's just a cheesy pulp sci-fi book turned into a bad movie. On the same token, I seriously thought about maybe giving the spot to The Passion of the Christ, which I happen to think is not only a spectacularly bad film, but also a near-total failure at the biblical scholarship it claims to engage in, and simply one of the most virulently hateful cultural artifacts of the modern era, along with being a truly disturbing window into the psyche of a deeply disturbed filmmaker. On the other hand, truly reckoning with The Passion would inevitably mean reckoning with the lingering psychological specter of my own Catholic upbringing and the continued havoc it plays with my emotional and spiritual development, and you folks being my audience does not obligate you to also be my therapist. Besides, it's probably a little too well directed as a torture porn film that thinks it has something meaningful to say about Christ to really qualify. So what would be the ideal subject? Well, to my mind, it would have to be a truly unique example of a bad film. Obviously, right off the bat, it would have to actually be a bad film, not just a box office miscalculation or a wasted effort or some forgettable two-star monument to low expectations. The type of bad where it feels it gets worse the more effort that was put into it. One of those cosmically doomed projects where so many wrong decisions were made on top of each other that eventually there was no possibility for any decision to actually be right at the end. It would have to have a bad screenplay, not simply one that tells its story poorly, but one where the story itself perhaps is a broken, curdled mess of a thing with confused themes, inconsistent characterizations, nonsensical dialogue, and a general lack of even rudimentary narrative cohesion. For example, a film where the narrative itself was dictated by forces erroneously held to be more important than good storytelling and recognizable emotional engagement, and or perhaps also mangled further by interfering studio notes, late in the game changes to the original plans, and other myriad factors that might render a film so poorly conceived at a script level it's actually painful to try and follow, yet also where said factors are so emblematic of a greater failing that to dissect them and view the ill-fitting pieces of the poor misbegotten creature laid out on the slab becomes a vital case study in whatever condition felled it. Theme would also be a key area of focus, not in terms of I don't like what this movie is saying, or I'm not interested in the subject, or even I vehemently disagree with the premise. Look, I happen to love Dirty Harry, Red Dawn, and The Incredibles, and not just love, I consider them to be objectively great films, and I'm able to do so without needing to believe that the police have too many restrictions on their behavior, or that armed military conflict is an inherently noble character-building experience for the young people, or that modern society is organized to conspire against the self-affirmation and birthright claim to ascendancy of the innately genetically superior. Guys, don't flip out on me about the last one. The Incredibles is a masterpiece, I love it, but Brad Bird has got himself some issues. No, when I talk about thematically, I'm talking about a scenario where it's either impossible to tell what a film is actually trying to say because none of its component subtext fits together in a meaningful way, or alternately, a film where the theme that's being attempted is explored so badly that it almost seems to argue against itself. Perhaps even an adaptation, one where the final product is either misunderstood the source material so completely or attempted a revisionist take so at odds with the structural integrity of the subject that the whole apparatus broke down. Indeed, a film where all of the above applied would seem ideal. You know the kinds of film I mean, the ones where you sit back aghast at what's unfolding and can't stop asking yourself questions like, who is this for? Who asked for this? Universally bad performances would also be a point in any hypothetical subject's favor. Obviously, this would be tied to the presence of bad original characterizations, as previously noted, but just as the right actor given the proper direction can elevate a work, a great actor used the wrong way, or even interesting performances distractingly untethered from an already unwieldy narrative, can absolutely be a mortal wound, especially if it's a film that was overwhelmingly set up to be character-driven, like, say, a movie where the entire narrative, thematic, and symbolic axis was meant to turn on a conflict between two lead characters that don't make sense in a relationship sense. That would definitely be a candidate. It goes without saying that we'd be looking at a badly directed film, yes, but that's an interesting concept to parse, because the fact is, transcendently bad filmmaking doesn't tend to come from mediocre or limited skill directors. Filmmakers like that tend to produce bad, but also generic and unambitious work, the type of films that are too forgettable to leave the kind of lasting psychic trauma endemic to a true disaster piece. Indeed, the most memorable of artistic failures unfailingly come from the most iconic of artistic visionaries. Only John Borman could deliver a failure of the fascinating scale of Zardoz or Exorcist II: The Heretic, only Scorsese could fail like Gangs of New York fails, only Ridley Scott could fail like Prometheus and Alien Covenant fail, only Spike Lee could have failed like She Hate Me fails. So then, any candidate for really that bad would almost certainly be the work of a supremely talented director with a clear overriding vision, but also one that flew disastrously off the rails. Maybe they were profoundly ill-suited to the material. Maybe they were undercut by studio interference. Maybe the studio should have interfered more and earlier. The bottom line would be that the film would not be the one-in-a-generation calamity that it is if the filmmaker and/or filmmakers had not worked so hard, but in so much the wrong way. On those same lines, craftsmanship would be a major issue as well. Now, this can simply mean poor construction, bad cinematography, spotty special effects, faulty production design, aesthetic eyesores, poor music choices, etc. But in the truly all-time memorable and awful films, it's usually about bad decisions as to what does and doesn't go together. Camera work that might have been ideal for one project will be a death sentence for another. Costume choices or set designs that perhaps played well on paper but didn't translate to the finished film. Editing decisions or scene construction that contribute to an already confused tone. Entire sequences that stagger the mind to consider that someone somewhere thought they were conceptually sound or even just a good idea. The absolute necessity, though, the complete and utter lack of redeeming quality. Notice I didn't say good quality. Even in some of the most infamous worst movie ever title holders tend to have at least one compelling moment. A single decent shot, an interesting set, maybe a nifty song or a whole sequence that can make them to some degree worthwhile. A bad film can have its good qualities without those good qualities actually making it better, even though I'm as guilty of anyone using these terms loosely and interchangeably in the past. The sort of film we'd be talking about here, though, would have to be so monumentally wrong-headed that qualities that otherwise might have redeemed actually make it worse by highlighting the mess the rest of it is and how unfortunate it is for that one good element to be submerged under all that mediocrity. For example, not that it would even be close to a candidate for my purposes here, but think about the lightsaber duel from The Phantom Menace versus the rest of The Phantom Menace. Also, and this is more of a practical consideration than anything else, it would probably have to be a relatively recent film, in large part because I'd rather not waste time on a subject where the bones have already been picked clean to the point of bleaching, but also because its consummate failings have been so established so quickly would be demonstrative in and of itself. All of those certainly are worthwhile criteria, but in the end, from the moment I began to consider whether or not to produce a really that bad special episode, I knew that one core factor was going to supersede the rest in terms of my final decision. It would have to be a film whose badness was bigger than the film itself. You see, good art is hard to make, and 99% of the time, it does not happen by accident or as a fluke. Bad movies, on the other hand, they happen all the time thanks to accident and flukes because no one tries to make a bad film. As such, it would be possible for a film to meet every sliver of criteria laid out previously and still not be something I'd waste God knows how many hours deconstructing because it could well be devoid of the cornerstone aspect of the really that good thesis: cultural context. Simply put, I'm only interested in applying this level of analysis to truly wretched film if said film's wretchedness were, on top of everything else wrong with it, symptomatic of a more widespread disease in the film industry, a more pervasive wrong-headed philosophy currently prevalent in the medium itself, or alternately simply representing the worst possible results of whatever happened to be the type of film storytelling currently at the top of the pop culture heap. An example here might be Howard the Duck, which was nowhere near the worst film of the 80s or 1984 or even the worst entry in its particular genre, but it was a textbook teachable representation of everything that could possibly go wrong in producing the high-concept, effects-driven, mass-appeal pop sci-fi fantasy blockbusters that dominated Hollywood produced popular culture in that era. Or, to wrap all that up more succinctly, we're looking for a bad movie that, by all rights in the context of its time, should have been good. Essentially, the subject of Really That Bad will have to be a film where not only did everything go very, very, very wrong, but where each individual failing was emblematic of negative trends coursing through the life stream of an entire medium. Because a bad film on its own is just a bad film. Who cares? But a bad film that represents the apotheosis of everything that is bad, wrong-headed, foolish, short-sighted, ignorant, ugly, cynical, depressing, broken, creatively bankrupt, morally repugnant, philosophically incoherent, ideologically repellent, and artistically vacant, that would be a film worthy of deep comprehensive analysis, if for no other reason than the possibility of reverse engineering from the record of its disintegration and understanding, not just of what happened, but of why, and what lessons you might want to carve in stone to make sure it never ever happens again. And for those of you wondering how long is he actually going to draw out this one really obvious lead into the punchline we've known the whole time, that was it. It was my considered opinion that not only is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice one of the worst films I have ever seen, one of the worst films in a generation, easily the worst blockbuster of the decade, and very possibly the worst Hollywood studio production relative to expectations, assembled talent, historic noteworthiness, and attendant legacy of its source material of the 21st century so far. A film that was disastrously conceived, ineptly produced, poorly written, incomprehensibly directed, badly acted, creatively splintered, yet also crushed by pretense in the way that only an auteur project can be. Hideous to look at, painful to listen to, and existentially depressing to think about after the fact. A film willed into being by a marketing algorithm, yet somehow believing itself to have been birthed fully formed from the kiss of the muses, that flails around with no coherent goal or theme, bludgeoning its audience, kneecapping the ambitions that it was intended to empower, and does genuine violence to the 80-plus years worth of cherished American pop mythology from whence it was drawn. And finally, a film that embodies in its totality everything that's wrong and can go wrong, with the self-referencing, continuity-obsessing, franchise-minded, merchandising-driven, conceived by committee, dictated by marketing, corporate-synergized, branded intellectual property, cinematic universe business model that currently represents both the bottom line of the Hollywood film industry and increasingly the organizing principle of the global entertainment business as a whole. Some of you may disagree with that assessment, and you have that right to be wrong. And very soon, between now and the release of Justice League, I will set my commitment to positivity aside one time in order to demonstrate to you how and why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice was really that bad. Hey gang, here's a question that keeps coming up. If your handle is MovieBob, where are your movie reviews? Well, my old reviews are in a lot of places. You'll find many of them on my YouTube channel, but you'll find the brand new ones on Geek.com, an awesome site that's also your one-stop news source for science, TV, gaming, technology, nerd culture, the works. You can find all my reviews directly by going to geek.com/author/bchipman, because that's my real name, and you can get regular updates on all my reviews and all of Geek.com's other great content by signing up for their kick-ass newsletter at subscribe.geek.com. And don't forget to also subscribe to the Geek.com YouTube channel, where you'll find the videos that accompany my reviews and tons of other great content too. Remember, that's Geek.com, the Geek.com newsletter, and Geek.com on YouTube. Make sure you don't miss out on all the latest MovieBob reviews. You can also check out my own new website, MovieBob Central, where you'll find my blog, links to all my work, and shop for my books, ebooks, and future MovieBob products. And please remember to like these videos, share them with all of your friends, and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching another MovieBob production.